Yes, please.
Actually, as I come back to what you were saying and what Andrew was saying as well, it is also true that language, at least linguists will maintain that language changes from below. That
Yes.
it is the
Yes.
push from below that makes the introduction of terms that we would never consider acceptable. I remember having a long conversation with a friend of mine who's a linguist here about the use of I should have went. Right? And I was, as a non-native speaker of English, I came into it feeling insulted by it. And she looked at me and said, well, you know, we actually start to consider it acceptable now because it has its own use and its own meaning and its own difference from I should have gone. I still don't get it, but I now see it on television. You will literally have drama. In serialized drama, you will hear people saying, I should have went. But this was more of a comment than a question. My question comes from another dinner time conversation with linguists and with applied linguists and people who are heavily invested in language coordination at local universities, and has to do with the use of electronic translators.
Yeah.
And the fact that increasingly language instructors are faced with the fact that students will go to the Google Translate or to Yahoo Translate and use it to present their compositions. You know,
what?
In language classes, they will. It's now the practice of certain students to, you know, it's a new form of cheating.
But it would be very obvious. I mean, they must get caught every time.
They always get caught, but
they're stupid.
One of the debates right now among certain linguists is, do we accept it as inevitable the way that we've had to accept the use of the calculator and work with it and teach students how to use those instruments? Or do we just say, no, it's cheating?
Well, I think there are two issues here. One is, as it were, theoretical. And in that perspective, I can see how this would not be cheating. But institutionally, it is cheating, and it should be resisted. I mean, it's not the same thing as the debate that goes on among linguists now about whether you should insist that kids use good grammar or not. I mean, that's a big. This is a different issue that you have raised. Theoretically, one of the ways in which languages will be changed in the future, I think, is through the distortions, the massive distortions that are massively present in the use of machine translation, especially on the web. It is going to affect, and there's nothing you can do about it. But it certainly should be never, or should never be used in a classroom. Yes, please. Yeah, I'm sorry. What is?
Well, I haven't had time to think it through, but still, speaking of machine translation once again, when one has to read a literary article, for example, in a different language, one doesn't necessarily, as you showed us, one doesn't necessarily have to know this language. I mean, I don't know German, but if I find an article in German about some phenomenon that's in our within our pen, I can read it perfectly well, and I get the meaning. So, as you said with Netflix, meaning one might assume may be translated, and it may be also automated, and the very idea of 2 by 2 equals 5 has become a banality to a great extent because of the dystopian tradition that has exhausted itself. Do you think that the artistic device is that which cannot be translated, or does it get automated just the same and can be somehow and also used, well, for the same type of categorization that you find in Netflix, for example?
Yeah. I think that there is a sliding scale of uniqueness that is available both to extra-literary and to literary use of language. That is to say that if you are a card-carrying Bakhtinian, you will begin by assuming that any act of communication is one that contains within it elements that are going to be lost after that moment. That all of the elements, the things that we can put under the label of language are really very limited. I mean, there are a lot of other things going on when we are talking to each other, and it's the languages we normally understand, plus all those other things that are involved, that make the uniqueness of any specific encounter the event that it is. Now, how does that relate to literature? Literature could be defined as that undertaking that more than any other seeks to capture the inexpressibility of any particular moment. To put into words more of what is usually not put into words, so that it is probably the most sustained and massive attempt to capture the uniqueness of individual moments. Whereas that what you're talking about, if I understand it correctly, I mean, when you don't know German, but you can sort of get the drift of something in German, is, I think, something else. That, among other things, is an index of your intelligence. Not everybody can do that. Secondly, it's an index of your familiarity with more than one language. So that, I mean, it's well known, and that's also a banality, that the more languages that you have, the more you're able to use languages that you don't have immediately. What that speaks, what that seems to say, it seems to me, is that there is something that is not only standardized, structural about any given language, but there is something standardized and structural about all human languages. And that's really where Chomsky's recursive theory comes in. I mean, what you're responding to, there's a sense in which you are doing a cryptanalysis when you're reading German. Yeah? I mean, looking for parallels between what you do know and what you don't know. Or were you making another point?
That's what I was thinking now. I have a million questions left, but I understand that we are out of time.
Let's continue our conversation.
Very good. Good.